Late this afternoon, Donald Trump filed an emergency application with the Supreme Court, asking the court to allow the special master, Judge Raymond Dearie, to review the roughly 100 classified documents that the FBI seized from his beach club in August. Trump's asking the Supreme Court to block part of a ruling by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, the court that ruled against him. Last month, that court said the Justice Department can use those classified documents in its investigation and that those documents did not fall under the special master's review. While Trump is not technically asking the high court to stop the DOJ from using the classified documents in the DOJ's investigation, he is now asking that the court make those documents part of the special master's review, which ultimately could complicate the DOJ's investigation into the seemingly pretty important classified documents, or at least we think. In its argument tonight, Team Trump writes, quote, President Trump was still the president of the United States when any documents bearing classification markings were delivered to his residence. At that time, he was the commander-in-chief of the United States. As such, his authority to classify or declassify information bearing on national security flowed from this constitutional investment of power in the president. So the argument is basically Trump has all the power. He can declassify what he wants, when he wants. He can convert a presidential record, even apparently a classified one, to a personal one. If the Supreme Court grants Trump's request and allows Judge Dearie to review those classified documents, that also means, and this is important, that Team Trump would get to see those classified documents. The Supreme Court tonight has ordered the Justice Department to respond to Trump's request by next Tuesday. Joining us now is Charlie Savage, New York Times national security and legal reporter. Charlie, thank you so much for being here tonight. I need you to help me understand exactly what can happen to these classified documents as they pertain to the Justice Department. If the Supreme, talk to me about the import here in terms of the department's investigation and what Trump is trying to do.
Sure. So the status quo right now, after the appeals court's intervention to remove these documents from the special master the Trump-appointed judge had ordered, is that there is unfettered access for these 103 documents with classification markings. Criminal investigators can present them to a grand jury. They can ask witnesses questions based on their contents. They can pursue criminal charges based on their mishandling or obstruction and not returning them. They can try to figure out what happened to the documents that were in the empty folders that had classification banners that were stored in the jumble alongside these ones they were able to recover. So Trump is trying to partially roll back what the appeals court did in unleashing the government to continue with its investigation in this area. He's saying, for now, you can we want the special master's review to look at these things to see whether they're subject to executive privilege or attorney-client privilege. That means we, the Trump people, need to be able to see them. It means we need to have security clearances to be able to do that, et cetera. It's a huge mess for the special master if the Supreme Court were to grant what he's asking for. On the other hand, it is not a huge mess at this stage for the Justice Department because they're not asking the Supreme Court to tie its hands again with respect to these documents.
Okay, so if the Department of Justice can continue on with its investigation, what then happens if the Supreme Court grants this request and Dearie gets to then review the classified documents? That's happening in parallel as the Department of Justice is doing its own investigation. Where do those two things intersect? I would assume that if Dearie somehow decides that, some of these classified documents are indeed privileged, that then affects the DOJ's investigation. Is that right?
That's exactly the right question to ask, because that's where this gets tricky. If the Justice Department takes investigative steps based on these documents, they knock on people's doors, they learn something else that leads to something else that leads to something else, and then down the road, it's not just Judge Dearie, it would be Judge Cannon really deciding that this something in that tranche was in fact privileged and they should not have looked at it. It creates opportunities for all kinds of mischief. What does she then do? Because these investigators have been exposed to information that she has decided they should not have seen. But that could be, in December or January that she makes that decision. So all kinds of things could have happened by then. At a minimum, does she say those people have to be removed from the investigation? Does she say the whole thing is fruit of the poison tree, as they say, and therefore stuff has to be thrown out? Does it give the Trump legal defense down the road, if he's indicted over this stuff, an opportunity to investigate the investigation and try to turn the tables back on the government and say, you used information you had no right to use, et cetera, and therefore these charges have to be thrown out or something, some kind of sanction like that. So it is very tricky because of that possibility dangling if these documents do get resubmitted for privilege review. That said, the government seems very confident that the idea that executive privilege has anything to say here, asserted by a former president over the objections of the current president to keep executive branch information from being reviewed by the Justice Department, part of the executive branch is for a criminal investigation. They think it's crazy to even suggest that it might be the case. So that if Judge Cannon were to rule that way, they would have a strong appeal. But of course, they would rather just not have to get into such a mess at all, Alex.
I am sure they would rather not have to get into such a mess. This case now goes, it's directed to Clarence Thomas, who oversees the 11th Circuit, and then he is likely to review that to the full Supreme Court. We will see how this all plays out. Charlie Savage, New York Times national security and legal reporter. Thanks for your wisdom tonight, Charlie. We needed it.